All right, so today we're going to be going over chapter 6.3, representing quadratic relations in different ways. Okay, so on Monday we learned key features of a quadratic function in vertex form. All right, so I'm just going to write here on the side, just so you jot some memories here. So this is what vertex form looks like. Okay, and then on Tuesday we graphed it. And when we graphed these, we knew they were quadratics, either shape of a U or shape of an N, which is what we learned yesterday. All right, so this over here is called vertex form. When I graph this, it's the shape of a U or an N. This is also known as the graphing form of a quadratic. Today we're going to learn two other forms of a quadratic. One of the forms is called standard form, and the other form is called factored form. Okay, and you've actually seen questions that look like this. It looks like standard form, and it looks like factored form. You just haven't really noticed it. Okay, so in standard form, it gives me one piece of information. Okay, so when we did vertex form, it gave us actually tons of information, like what the vertex is, the max or min, the stretch or shrink, which way it opens, and so forth. With standard form, it gives us one piece of important information, and that is called the Y-intercept. All right, and this last number on the end of the equation is known as the Y-intercept. All right, it still tells me information like which way it opens in the front. It also tells me if it's a stretch or shrink by the number after the equal sign. All right, but more importantly, it tells me what the Y-intercept is. All right, so I'm going to do an example that you might see on your tests. Oops. Okay, and there's going to be a couple of questions that they're going to ask you. One of the questions is, which way does this graph open? Okay, so does this graph open up? Shoot, what do I keep on doing that? Does this graph open up, or does this graph open down? Okay, so the first thing we need to know is if it opens up or down. So to see if something opens up or down, we look after the equal sign. Okay, so we could see a negative after the equal sign. If we see a negative after the equal sign, we know it opens down. And because it opens down, we know it's a maximum. Okay, so they'll ask you, is this quadratic have a maximum or does it have a minimum? The only way we can answer that is to find out if it opens up or down first. Once we figure that out, then we can figure out if it's a max or min. Okay, so remember, when it opens down, it's a maximum. They might ask you if this graph is a stretch or shrink. All right, so we're going to look at the A value. In this case, the A value is the number after the equal sign. If the A value is higher than 1, then it's a stretch. And it has a factor of 3. Notice I'm just writing the number 3. I'm not writing -3 because the negative tells me if it opens up or down or if it's a max or min, right? But the number itself will tell me if it's a stretch or a shrink. And not only that, it tells me what the factor is. Okay, so in this case, the number is 3, so the factor is going to be 3. The last question they'll ask me is, what is the Y-intercept in this question? And the Y-intercept is just a number at the end. Okay, so we just got to be careful. We need to write the Y-int. And I'm going to write -8. Okay, I know the equation is -8, but when we find out what the Y-intercept is, we got to take that number, the operation in front of it. Okay, so in this question, the Y-intercept is -8. All right, so let's move on to factored form. Okay, so here's factored form. And factored form gives us the same kind of information standard form gives us. It gives us the same information that vertex form gives us. Okay, so after the equal sign, if I see a positive or a negative, I know if it will open up or down. Not only that, once I know if it opens up or down, I can find out if it's a max or min. It also has an A value, which will tell me if it's a stretch or shrink. If there is no number there, then there is no stretch or shrink. There's none. Okay, and then the last piece of information are these two numbers inside the bracket. So these are going to be numbers in an example. And these two numbers give us information as well. Okay, and that information is called the X-intercepts. So before I found out what the Y-intercepts are, these two numbers will tell me what the X-intercepts are. All right, now they have different names for it. Sometimes they call it roots. So if you see on your test, it says find the roots. They're just asking you to find the X-intercepts. It's the same word. And they might also say the word zeros. Find the zeros, which is also the same thing. All right. And we just have to remember one rule about the roots and the X-intercepts. It's the same thing when we're finding the vertex and the X value in the vertex. It's the opposite sign. All right. So I'm going to write here opposite sign. All right. So that's what the X-intercepts are. They're always going to be the opposite signs of what's inside the bracket. Okay. So let me write down an example here. Okay, again, they might ask you if it's a maximum or minimum. So to find out if it's a maximum or minimum, I look after the equal sign. I don't know how to make this bigger. Okay, they're going to ask you to look after the equal sign. If I see nothing, then it's positive. If it's positive, it opens up. And because it opens up, it's a minimum. You're going to notice there is no number after the equal sign. So the stretch or shrink factor is none. Because it's 1. The last thing they're going to ask you is to find the roots. Okay, or they'll say find the X-intercepts. So I'm just going to take the numbers inside the bracket. And we just have to remember the rule. It's going to be the opposite sign. Okay, so when I write the X-intercepts, I can't write them as two numbers with brackets like the way I wrote vertex. I just have to write the two numbers out. Okay, so the opposite sign is going to be -4 and +3. And those are going to be my X-intercepts for this question. Okay, you cannot write your X-intercepts like this, because when I write things with brackets, it means there's an X value and a Y value. Okay, and you cannot do that because this looks like coordinate system. That looks like an X value and a Y value. But when I write the X-intercepts, it's just two numbers. Okay, so do not write it like that. That would be incorrect. Right? And that's two other ways of representing quadratics. Okay, so we have something called standard form, where it gives me the Y-intercept. And I have something called factored form, which gives me the X-intercepts. Okay, so now that we know this, let's just do 3 quick examples. Okay, and we do have to remember things from the last chapter, right? So when I have a question that looks like this, and it says find the X-intercepts and the Y-intercepts, when it's in this form, it's factored form. So you might not be able to tell right away, but this question is in factored form. because I have two brackets. All right, so when the question's in factored form, it gives me the x-intercepts. So the x-intercepts are just going to be these two numbers. Okay, remember it's going to be the opposite sign. All right, so that gives me the x-intercepts. Now, how do I find the y-intercepts for these examples? How do I find the y-intercepts for these questions? All right, so here's how we do it. I have to expand and simplify this question to find out what the y-intercept is, because I need to change it from factored form to standard form. And to do that, I need to expand and simplify it. All right, so hopefully you remember from the last unit, to expand and simplify, I need to get rid of my brackets. Okay, so for those that are doing chapter 5 tests, it's due on Friday. This would be question 1C and 1D. All right, so this is what it's going to look like. I have x plus 7, x minus 3. I'm going to take the first term. I'm going to write it in the front. I'm going to take the second bracket, write it after the first term. Then I'm going to take the middle term and write the second bracket. Okay, and then from here, I'm going to use distributive properties. I'm going to take the number in front and multiply it into the bracket. I'm going to take this number and multiply this into the bracket. Okay, so x times x is just going to give me xx. X times negative 3 is going to be negative 3x. Positive 7 times x is going to give me positive 7x. Positive 7 times negative 3 is going to give me negative 21. Okay, I wrote it in those colors specifically because I wanted to show you that these two are like terms. Okay, so these two can be added together. In math, we don't write xx, we're going to write x squared. Negative 3 plus 7 is positive 4x. And this negative 21 comes for the ride. Okay, so I have changed my equation from factored form to standard form. And when I do that, I could find out what the y-intercept in the question is. And in this question, the y-intercept is negative 21. And you have to be able to do this process. This is why the last unit, it's kind of continuous. Is everybody okay with converting from factored form to standard form? Okay, so the process is called expanding and simplifying, but that's what you're doing. Okay, you're going from factored form, from question with 2 brackets to question with no brackets. All right, let's try another example. I'll try to move it here. I'm going to take this and we're going to move this just further down. All right. Okay, so this question is very similar to the one we just did. Again, this one's in factored form. When the question is in factored form, it gives me the x-intercepts. So that would be easy to answer. I'm just going to take this number and this number. I have to remember it's going to be the opposite sign. So the x-intercept for this question is going to be negative 4, opposite sign, and positive 2. Those are my x-intercepts. To find out the y-intercept, I have to expand and simplify the question. It seems like a long process, but that's what you have to do. Okay, so it's kind of good review for the test that you got to hand in on Friday. So x times x is going to be xx. X times -2 is going to be -2x. That gets rid of my first bracket. To get rid of my second bracket, I'm going to go +4 times x. It's going to be +4x. +4 times -2 is going to give me -8. Okay, so I'm just going to finish this off. X squared plus 2x minus 8. Okay, so this question is now in standard form. And when a question is in standard form, it gives me the y-intercept. And in this question, the y-intercept is -8. So notice when you do the y-intercept, the symbol doesn't change. Okay, so it's -8, it's going to stay as -8. But when you do the x-intercepts, the operation changes. Okay, kind of like when you do the vertex, the x value changes operation, but the y value stays the same. Okay, so if a question's in factored form, it gives me the x-intercepts. If the question's in standard form, it gives me the y-intercepts. Okay? So what if we get a question that starts off in standard form? Okay, so this question here, it gives me the question in standard form, x squared plus 7x plus 6. Okay, you can see that this is standard form because it has no brackets. And when it's in standard form, it gives me the y-intercept. So this question, I can answer what the y-intercept is easily. +6. But when I'm trying to do the x-intercept, gets a little confusing because how do I go from standard form to factor form? How do I change this question here where there's no brackets to a question that looks up here with 2 brackets? All right, so to go from standard form to factored form, it's kind of like question 2B and 2D on your test. Okay, so to go from standard form to factored form, I need to factor the question. All right, so to factor the question, I'm going to use the TO chart. Okay, so hopefully remember the TO chart. It's just a letter T. And I'm basically going to factor the question. The first term goes on the top left. The last term goes on the top right. In this case, it's +6. And the middle term goes on the bottom right with an equal sign. I need to find 2 things that multiply to x squared. That's just going to be x and x. 2 things that multiply to +6. I have 2 options, 2 times 3 or 6 times 1. Hopefully you realize it's going to be 6 and 1. Now I just have to check by cross multiplying and writing the answers underneath. So when I look at the work here, it's going to be 7x equals 7x. So my guesses of 6 and 1 is correct. Okay, I know it's not going to be 2 and 3. And if you think about it, 2 times 3 is 6, but 2 plus 3 is 5. So that's not going to work out. All right, so now I need to write out my answers. When I write my answers out, this is going to be one of them. This is going to be my other bracket. And I need to write my answers out before I answer what the x-intercepts are. Okay, so my answer is going to be x plus 6 for one of the brackets. It's going to be x plus 1 because both numbers are positive. And this is my answer. This is how I convert it from standard to factored form. Okay, so this is factored form. But I need to find out what the x-intercepts are. Okay, so the x-intercepts are the numbers inside the bracket. And we just have to remember it's going to be the opposite signs. So it's going to be -6 and -1. That is how I find my x-intercepts when a question is in standard form. All right.